The Strait of Hormuz just hit its lowest traffic level in 5 weeks. And the Iranian military just issued a warning that might explain why. But it's the phrase they used that's got everyone in Washington quietly freaking out. Before we get into it, drop the country you're watching from in the comments. I'm genuinely curious who's tuning in today. I do read them, by the way. So let's talk about what just dropped from Tehran. Because this isn't the usual weekly threat. This is something else entirely. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, put out a statement a few hours ago. And the language is deliberately vague in that way that actually means something very specific. They're warning they could close additional energy export corridors that benefit the United States and its allies. Now, if you're just skimming headlines, that sounds like more of the same. Iran threatens, Iran blusters, the world moves on, right? But here's the detail that made me sit up straight. The IRGC didn't just say we might close the strait. They said regional energy exports are either shared by all or denied to all. Shared by all or denied to all. That's not a threat, that's a philosophy. And when a military organization starts issuing philosophical ultimatums, that's when you need to pay real close attention. Because here's what's happening underneath all this. Just within the last several days, the United States reimposed a naval blockade on Iranian ports. Let me explain what that actually means. It means U.S. naval forces are physically stopping ships from entering or leaving Iranian harbors. Stopping them, checking them, turning them back. This is not a paper sanction. This is steel on water enforcement. And the Iranians? Well, they're responding in the only currency they really have left. Choke points. Now, the Strait of Hormuz. I want to explain this clearly because it's the entire reason this matters. That strip of water at the mouth of the Persian Gulf is only 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. 21 miles. And through that 21-mile gap passes about 20% of the world's petroleum. 20%. Think about that for a second. 1 out of every 5 barrels of oil traded globally goes through that one stretch of water. And Iran's sitting right on top of it. They can see it from their coastline. They've been threatening to shut it for decades, but they've always pulled back. Always. But now, the shipping data is telling a different story. The report I read cited vessel traffic through the strait has already fallen to its lowest level in 5 weeks. That's not a threat. That's a trend. Ships are already staying away. Captains are already making different decisions. The market is already pricing in the possibility that this time might be different. You know, I spent the morning going back through the sequence of events here because the timing matters. The U.S. naval blockade goes back into effect. Then, within days, the IRGC issues this statement. But they didn't just say, we're going to do this. They framed it as a choice. They said the region's energy corridors are either shared by all or denied to all, which is a fascinating rhetorical move because it flips the script. It says, you're not blocking us, you're blocking the entire region. If you want to close our ports, fine. Then nobody gets to move anything. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. And I haven't seen anybody on the major networks explain this part properly yet. The IRGC didn't just mention Hormuz. They said additional energy export corridors, plural, additional, which means they're thinking about more than just the strait. They're thinking about the Bab el-Mandeb, the Strait of Malacca, maybe. All the other narrow points where oil flows. They're saying, if you make it impossible for us, we'll make it impossible for everybody. And that's the part that's keeping people in Washington awake at night. Because it's not just about oil prices spiking. It's about what happens when a country with nothing left to lose decides that if they're going down, they're taking the global economy with them. Let me take you back a little, because this didn't come out of nowhere. There's been a slow burn building between the US and Iran for months now. The nuclear program's been advancing. The proxies in Lebanon and Yemen have been getting bolder. The US has been tightening the economic vice with sanctions that have basically turned Iran's economy into a survival game. And now, the naval blockade. The Iranians have been warning about this for a while, but it's the way they're warning now that's different. This statement doesn't sound like a government trying to de-escalate. It sounds like a government that's made a calculation, a dark one. Let me read you what the statement actually said as reported by IRNA. And I want you to listen to the framing here. The regional energy exports are either shared by all or denied to all. That's not a demand. That's an axiom. It's a preemptive justification for whatever comes next. They're putting the world on notice. If you squeeze us to the point where we can't export, then nobody exports. Not our allies, not our neighbors, not even the countries that are supposedly neutral. Now, here's the part I keep coming back to. And honestly, I went back and forth on this all morning. The IRGC didn't say we will close the strait. They said we could close additional corridors. Could, not will. That's deliberate. That's them leaving room. But it's also them signaling that they're already considering it, already planning for it. Because you don't issue a statement like this unless you've already run the scenarios, unless you've already briefed your commanders, unless you're already prepared to pull the trigger. And that's what makes this different from the usual theater. The theater is, we will destroy you, we will burn your ships, all the dramatic language that never quite becomes real. This was colder, more analytical, more final. Okay, so let's get into the actual mechanics of what this would mean. Because I think a lot of people hear Iran closes the strait and they think about gas prices. It's so much bigger than gas prices. The Strait of Hormuz is the artery for about 17 million barrels of oil a day. 17 million. That's more than Saudi Arabia produces, more than Russia exports. If that flow stops, global oil prices don't just spike, they explode. Some analysts are predicting prices could double within a week, triple if it drags on. And we're not just talking about oil. We're talking about liquefied natural gas, about refined products, about everything that runs on petroleum, which is basically everything in a modern economy. Your food, your medicine, the plastics in your phone, the asphalt on your roads. All of it depends on that flow. Now, the U.S. has said it would keep the strait open. That's been official policy for decades, freedom of navigation. But here's the question nobody seems to be asking. At what cost? At what point does keeping the strait open mean a direct military confrontation with Iran? Because that's what they're preparing for. This isn't a bluff anymore. This is a position. And the Iranians know something that we sometimes forget. They don't have to win a naval war. They just have to make the cost of keeping the strait open so high that nobody wants to pay it anymore. Mines are cheap. Small boats are cheap. Missiles are cheap. The Iranians have all of them in quantity, and they've been practicing the kind of asymmetric warfare that's designed to overwhelm a technologically superior force with sheer numbers and unpredictability. Let me explain what that looks like, because it's not what you see in the movies. Imagine a swarm of small, fast boats, armed with rockets, moving at high speed through a narrow channel, coming from multiple directions. And while that's happening, shore-based missiles are firing. And underneath it all, there are mines floating in the water. Not a battle, a chaos event. The U.S. Navy is the most powerful force on Earth. Nobody's disputing that. But in that kind of environment, power doesn't always win. Because it's not about who has the bigger guns. It's about who's willing to endure more chaos. And that's the part that's genuinely scary, because the Iranians have been preparing for this for years. They built entire military doctrines around the idea of closing Hormuz. They've run exercises. They've deployed mines. They put small boats on standby. This isn't a threat they're making up on the fly. This is a capability they've been developing since before most of us were paying attention. But here's the other piece of this puzzle. The IRGC isn't the Iranian government. Not exactly. They're a parallel military organization with their own leadership, their own intelligence apparatus, and in many ways, their own foreign policy. The IRGC controls a huge chunk of Iran's economy. They run the missile programs. They manage the proxy networks. They've got their fingers in everything. And sometimes the IRGC acts on its own schedule, independent of what the elected government wants. So when the IRGC issues a statement like this, it's not just a military warning, it's also a political move inside Iran. It's the hardliners telling everyone, look, the Americans are squeezing us, we need to push back, and we need to push back hard. The actual Iranian president, he's been more cautious recently. He's talked about diplomacy. He's hinted at wanting to negotiate. But the IRGC doesn't care about diplomacy. They care about leverage. and closing the strait is the ultimate leverage play. It's the nuclear option of economic warfare. You know what I keep thinking about? This whole situation has been building since the Trump administration pulled out of the nuclear deal. That was what, 2018? Feels like a lifetime ago now. But that decision set off a chain reaction. Iran started enriching uranium again. They started building centrifuges. They started threatening. And every time they escalated, the U.S. escalated back. Sanctions, more sanctions, naval deployments, now a blockade. And the Iranians, they got backed into a corner. And when you corner a country that has control of a strategic choke point, they're going to use it. So where are we right now? Shipping traffic through Hormuz is already dropping. Tankers are taking longer routes. Insurance rates are going up. The global oil market is starting to twitch, even though nothing's happened yet. Because the market doesn't wait for things to happen. It waits for the threat of things happening. And right now, the threat is real. But here's the thing nobody's talking about, and I mean nobody. If Iran actually closes the strait, the United States has a problem that goes beyond oil prices, because the U.S. Navy has to respond. It has to. The entire post-World War II order is based on the idea that the seas are free, that commerce isn't disrupted by military force, that the global economy can rely on safe passage. If Iran closes the strait and the U.S. does nothing, that order starts to crumble. Other countries start making their own plays. China starts making moves in the South China Sea. Russia starts pushing harder in the Black Sea. It's not just about Iran. It's about the precedent. It's about what happens when the world's most powerful military says we can't keep this key waterway open, and the world listens. Now, the Iranians know this. They've always known it. That's why they've been leveraging the strait for decades. But they've never gone all the way. They've never actually shut it down completely, because they know that once they do, there's no going back. Once you close the strait, you don't get to say, oops, just kidding. You've crossed a threshold, and thresholds in geopolitics are very hard to uncross. And what does the U.S. do in response? Do they launch airstrikes on Iranian coastal defenses? Do they minesweep the strait while taking heavy losses? Do they go to war with Iran? Because that's the road we're looking at if this escalates. And nobody in Washington wants that. But nobody wants to back down either. So you get this horrible momentum, both sides locked in, both sides too invested to blink, and the people who pay the price, the global economy. The families in oil importing countries who can't afford to heat their homes. The supply chains that grind to a halt. Let me step back for a second because I want to make sure you understand the bigger picture here. The United States reimposed a naval blockade on Iran. That's an act of war, by the way. It's technically a blockade. A blockade is an act of war under international law. But the administration framed it as sanctions enforcement and maritime security. Same old story, different wording. The Iranians see it for what it is. They know the blockade is meant to choke their economy, to starve their regime of revenue, to force them to the negotiating table from a position of weakness. And the IRGC's response? If you block us, we block everyone. That's not a negotiation tactic. That's a threat of mutual destruction. It's saying, we're willing to hurt ourselves as long as we hurt you too. And that's genuinely unnerving because it's not rational. It's not strategic in the normal sense. It's desperate. And desperate actors are unpredictable. Now, I'm not saying Iran's going to close the strait tomorrow. I'm not saying they even want to. But the fact that they're publicly floating the idea, tying it to a philosophical statement, and backing it up with actual drops in shipping traffic, that's a warning shot, a serious one. And the markets are reacting. Not panicking, not yet, but there's a nervousness underneath the surface. Oil futures are moving up. Shipping companies are revising their routes. Insurance premiums for tankers in the Gulf are climbing. This is the quiet before something, and nobody's sure what it's going to be. Let me tell you the one thing that worries me the most about all of this. We've seen this pattern before. A country feels cornered. It starts making threats. The other side doesn't take them seriously because it's heard them before. And then one day, the threats become actions. And nobody's prepared. The Iranians have been warning about this for years. They've been saying, if you push us, we'll push back. And now they're saying, if you blockade us, we'll shut the region. And we're still not taking them seriously enough. We're still treating this like it's more of the same. But the shipping data says something different. The language of the IRGC says something different. The timing says something different. There's a seriousness to this warning that I haven't felt from Tehran in a long time. And here's the part I keep circling back to. The phrase shared by all or denied to all. That's not about Iran. That's about the entire region. They're saying the Gulf's energy resources don't belong to you. They don't belong to us. They belong to the region. And if the region can't share them with everyone, then the region will deny them to everyone. That's a collective punishment framing. It's designed to turn America's allies against America. It's saying to Saudi Arabia, to the UAE, to Qatar, look, the Americans are making this hard for everyone, not just us, everyone. So why are you siding with them? And that's the real danger here. It's not just about oil. It's about the alliances. It's about the region fracturing. It's about America's partners in the Gulf starting to wonder if the relationship is worth the cost. Because if the strait closes, they're hit too. The Saudis can't export. The Qataris can't export their gas. Everyone loses. So what happens now? I think we're in for a few very tense weeks. The Biden administration, actually it's 2026 now, so whoever's in the White House doesn't matter. The U.S. position is going to be, we're keeping the strait open, period. The Iranians are going to keep saying, if you blockade us, we close it. And the ships are going to stay away. And all the while, behind the scenes, there are going to be back-channel conversations. Diplomats flying back and forth. Someone trying to find a way out. Because nobody actually wants this to go hot. The Iranians know they'd lose a direct war. The U.S. knows a war with Iran would be a nightmare. So there's an incentive to de-escalate. But the problem is that the blockade is already in effect. The Iranians can't just ignore it. They have to respond. They have to show that they're not backing down. And the U.S. can't lift the blockade without looking weak. So you get this stupid, dangerous deadlock where both sides want a way out, but neither side can take the first step. And somewhere in between, the global economy waits and watches and holds its breath. I want to close with something that's been sticking with me. The IRGC statement didn't just threaten, it warned. And there's a difference. A threat is conditional. A warning is a prediction. They're telling us what they think is going to happen. They're telling us they believe this is the direction things are heading. And if that's true, if they genuinely believe a conflict is coming, then they're already preparing for it. And we should be too. But here's the question I can't shake. And I want you to think about this with me. If the Iranians are willing to threaten the global economy over a blockade, what happens when the blockade gets tighter? What happens when the sanctions get harsher? What happens when there's no room left to escalate, and the only move is the one you can't take back? Because that's where we're heading, right toward the edge. And I don't think there's a soft landing. That's where this whole thing is right now. Fluid, dangerous, moving faster than anyone's willing to admit. I'm going to be tracking it every day. And when something breaks, we'll get into it right away. Make sure you're subscribed if you want to stay in the loop on this one. I'll see you in the next report.